My name is Lisa, I'm 32, and until a few months ago, I had a peaceful life that from the outside you would probably call normal. A small apartment on the third floor in a Portland, Oregon neighborhood, bright, with plants on the windowsill that I talk to by name. My monstera is named Ing, and the Zamioculcas is named Ilsa. I work as a project manager at a small agency. I like my coffee with oat milk, and I love John. My John. He's 2 years older than I am. He studied mechanical engineering, and today he does something with product development that I never quite understand. And he laughs when I pretend that I do. We've been married for 5 years, and when I think of our wedding, the first thing I see are his hands. Calm, steady hands that held my bouquet when I cried, because the sky opened up despite the weather app, and the justice of the peace said, "Rain it is then." We were happy, as cliché as that sounds. This "we" was a warm blanket over our daily lives. But that was before I noticed the aftertaste. It began on a Saturday in late October. Marianne had announced she was coming over. Marianne, 2 syllables like 2 sharp edges, John's mother. In my head, I never called her mom-in-law. The word was too soft for this woman who would show up in beige coats like a cold breeze, always with a perfect hairdo, lipstick that never smudged, and sentences that looked like compliments but felt like subtle cuts. "Oh, Lisa, you baked again. It smells interesting." Or, "John, you look tired. Are you working too much? It really shows." She almost always brought something with her. Soup in an old mason jar, apple pie with too much cinnamon, healing herbs from the garden of her suburban townhouse in Gresham. "All natural," she would say, and put a hand on my shoulder as if I needed to urgently grasp it. This Saturday she had brought a pumpkin soup with a small screw-top jar of a greenish paste. "Parsley pesto, my dear," she said to John, a phrase she never used with me. "It's good for the stomach," she laughed, "and for the nerves." It was warm in our kitchen. John opened the window and steam rose from the pot. I was looking for spoons and heard the dull clatter of lids and the sound of stirring. Marianne talked and talked, and I thought that her voice was always a little too loud, as if she were speaking for someone in the next room. "Paul is doing better today," she said suddenly, and I paused. Paul, John's father. For months he had been at home in a state of semi-consciousness, and the doctors would say things like palliative care and symptom-oriented. When his voice came over the phone, it was a whisper, a rustle. Sometimes he would talk to me as if I were still the student John had just met, and I would talk to him as if we had all the time in the world. "He ate my soup," Marianne said, "and the physical therapist says he has a good color." Then she looked at John's hands, which were holding the soup bowl. "You have to eat too, son. You'll get too thin. Lisa, can you please put some pesto on his?" I smiled. "Of course." I twisted the lid off the jar. A strong smell hit me. Parsley, yes, but there was something else. A bitter, sour undertone that I didn't recognize. "What else is in here?" I asked. "Nothing special," Marianne said. "A little yarrow, a hint of valerian, just old family remedies. You wouldn't know much about those, of course." She nodded at me as if she had given me a profound insight. I put a teaspoon over John's soup, and then a little on my own. Maybe I'm imagining it, I thought. Maybe it's normal for herbs to smell like this when you crush them. John took the first spoonful. "Delicious," he said, and gave his mother that soft, boyish smile he only had for her. I ate too. The flavor was strong. It coated my throat. Afterward, something lingered, a scratch, a film I wanted to wash away. I drank some water. "It's good," I said. "It's really good." After dinner, Marianne left. It was as if the air became clearer as soon as the front door closed behind her. John was clearing the table, whistling, and then he stopped whistling, holding on to the countertop as if he had lost his rhythm. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, "just a little dizzy." He waved it off and went into the living room. An hour later, he was lying on the sofa with a hand on his forehead. "Headache," he mumbled, "and I feel a bit queasy." I brought him some water, sat by his side, and stroked his arm. "Maybe you didn't get enough sleep." He nodded. even though we both knew that wasn't true. He woke up twice that night, and once he was in the bathroom for a long time. In the morning, his skin was a little gray over his cheekbones, and I said we should stay home. He protested, but then gave in. By Tuesday, he was feeling fine again. On Wednesday, he was laughing again about something a colleague had said, and I thought maybe we were both just sensitive when Marianne was around, he because she was his mother, me because I had never figured out how to stand up straight in her presence without being looked at crookedly. 2 weeks later, Marianne came over again. This time she brought a poppy seed cake. "Be careful," John joked. "Don't drug us." Marianne just smiled, a thin line that wasn't a laugh. "Don't be silly," she said. "I know what I'm doing." I thought, yes, you do. The cake tasted sweet and heavy. That evening, John said he was tired, very tired. He went to bed at 9. I was washing the dishes, heard him breathing deeply in the bedroom, and then a small groan I didn't recognize. I went to him. "Everything okay?" "I feel sick," he whispered. "Just a little. Go to sleep." I didn't go to sleep. I got a bowl, put a cool cloth on his forehead. Our apartment was quiet. The bus went by outside, someone laughed on the sidewalk, and something was creeping around inside me that I didn't want to call suspicion yet. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe it was the cake. Maybe a virus. I forced myself to find rational reasons. It almost worked. In the morning, John was pale, but he went to work. I watched him put on his backpack and thought, "You are my home. Please stay." I started a list, at first out of boredom, then because I love numbers and order, and because things you write down sometimes become clearer. I wrote, Saturday, soup plus pesto, dizziness, nausea, headaches. Then, 2 weeks later, poppy seed cake, nausea, fatigue. I also wrote, in between, no symptoms, and next to it, in parentheses, no visit. I was scaring myself, so I put the list in a drawer, and yet I took it out the next Monday when John called in the evening. "Mom's stopping by later to bring me some tea, for stress." I said, "Oh," and heard my voice go too high. "I'll be home at 7. He said, "No stress, honey." No stress. Marianne arrived at 7:30. She smelled of something that reminded me of old apothecary cabinets. "It has lemon balm," she said, "and a little hops." She put a thermos on the table, took the liberty of getting our mugs from the cabinet herself. "John needs peace and quiet. You make him a little too antsy sometimes, Lisa. You're such a driver." She smiled as if it were a term of endearment. I pretended not to hear it. John took the tea. "Thanks, Mom." He drank, and I watched his throat as he swallowed, as if the key were there. I sipped my water. Later, after she had left, we sat next to each other on the sofa, watching half an episode of some show we weren't following. John put his head on my shoulder. I stroked his hair, smelled his scalp, that familiar warm scent that smells like home, and then his body became heavy, too heavy. "I'm so tired," he mumbled. He stood up, stumbled, caught himself, and smiled. "I'm fine." I smiled back. Inside, I picked up the pen, invisible but sharp. Monday, T. Extreme fatigue. That night, I fell out of a dream in which I was standing in a kitchen that wasn't ours, and a hand was stirring and stirring a pot from which no steam rose. I woke up with a word in my head, bitter. The next morning, after John had left, I opened the thermos. It smelled of lemon balm, yes, of hops maybe, but there was something else, again, that note that didn't fit my idea of a family remedy. I took a spoon, poured a little tea into a jam jar, and taped a note to it. Marianne's T3. I put it in the back of the fridge behind Ilsa. I was ashamed, and at the same time, I felt as if I had suddenly woken up. I didn't Google it. Not yet. I clung to the day, to emails, to status calls, to the reliable things you can check off. Around noon, John called. "I feel great," he said. "Mom was right. The tea was good." I said, "That's nice," and my tongue tasted of metal. In the evening, Marianne called. "And how's my boy?" I said, "Fine," and she sighed with relief as if she had been expecting a result. "You see," she said, "you just have to steer things in the right direction." I hung up and wrote, "Tuesday, fine." 2 days later, the news that had been a low hum in the background for months finally came. Paul was having a very bad day. Marianne wrote in the family group chat, "He's barely eating, sleeping a lot. The doctor says it's time to take care of certain things." John got in his car immediately and drove to Gresham. I stayed behind. I had an appointment I couldn't reschedule, and I was ashamed that I couldn't just drop everything. When John came back at night, he looked so tired that I didn't ask any more questions. We slept close to each other, his back against my stomach, and I held him as if he were the one who needed his hand held in the night. The next day, Marianne came to our place. "Just for a bit," she wrote. She brought broth, very light, good for the nerves. This time, I stayed in the kitchen while she warmed it up. I pretended to polish silverware, that old, silly reflex to make yourself invisible while you're watching everything. Marianne stirred the broth. Her movements were strangely ceremonial, as if it were a ritual. "You should let me show you a few herbal tricks sometime, Lisa," she said, without looking at me. "It's important to support a man." "I support John," I said. My voice sounded calm. I was proud of it. She put the spoon down, smiled, again that thin line. "I know." John ate. He praised it. That night he woke up. Nausea. A spinning head. I held the bowl, I held the cloth, I held my breath. In the morning, he rubbed his neck. "Maybe it's a bug." I nodded. "Maybe." I stood in the shower and let the water run so hot that my skin turned red. I thought, either I'm imagining all of this or something is fundamentally wrong here. I thought of Paul's name, of the doctor's words, of that family group chat message, of the word "take care of." I thought of Marianne's precise hands, of the thermos, of the aftertaste. When I came out of the shower, Marianne was standing in the hallway. She had a key. "I just wanted to check on things," she said, so casually that I felt a chill. "Is John sleeping?" "Yes," I said. I could hear my heart in my ears. "You still have the key?" I asked when we were in the kitchen. "Did you think that would be convenient?" "Of course," she said. "I'm his mother." "He's my husband." "That's not mutually exclusive." I opened the fridge, stood in such a way that she couldn't see me reaching back and moving the Marianne's T3 jar a little to the left. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew. I couldn't just observe anymore. I had to keep the trail before it was erased. That evening, when John was sleeping, I sat down at the kitchen table and put my list in front of me. I wrote down the days, the times, what Marianne had brought, how John had reacted. I drew arrows. I drew lines. I felt like I was overreacting. And at the same time, I saw the pattern that appeared when you put things side by side. Visit, consumption, symptoms, recovery. Visit, consumption, symptoms. I stared at the words until they lost their meaning. Then I stood up, went into the bedroom, sat on the edge of John's bed, and held his hand. I whispered, "I'm taking care of you," and didn't know if I was promising it to him or to myself. That night, I dreamed of a long table where we sat. John, Marianne, Paul, me. There were bowls on the table, steaming, gleaming, but every time I took a spoonful, it was empty. I woke up when the alarm clock vibrated and felt as if I had gotten into something I could no longer escape. In the morning, I made the decision that would change everything. I would tell John. Not with hints, not on the fly, not with a guilty smile that apologizes before the sentence is finished. I would say it, clearly. Because love isn't just about holding on, it's also about warning. I made coffee. The apartment smelled of what had held us together for years. Beans, warmth, morning. John came out of the bathroom, hair wet, a towel around his waist. He looked good, even pale. He looks good, but different. "Sit down for a second," I said. He did. He smiled that crooked smile that always makes my stomach feel soft. "What's up?" I took a deep breath. "I have a feeling," I said, and heard my voice tremble slightly, "that you always feel worse after your mom has been here. I've written it down. Soup, cake, tea, broth. You're always sick afterward. And I think something isn't right." For a second, there was only silence. Then something in his face changed, not badly, just tiny, a shadow that glided over his forehead. "Lisa," he said slowly, well, you know how you are sometimes. You overthink things, a lot." "I know," I said, "but look at the list." He didn't look at it. He took my hand. "Mom would never hurt me. Never. She's sometimes particular. But she loves me." I nodded. "I know she loves you." I lied. "I'm just saying there's a pattern." He smiled as if he were reassuring a child. "It's sweet that you're worried, really, but you have to believe me. There's nothing there." "I believe you," I said, and I knew it wasn't true. "But I'm not going to stop watching." He stood up, kissed my forehead. "Do what you have to do, and I'll drink your coffee." He lifted the mug. "Without pesto." I laughed, even though I didn't feel like it. When the front door closed behind him, I sat back down at the table and stared at my list as if it could start to speak. Outside, the bus went by. Someone was pushing a stroller. A trash can rattled somewhere. I thought of Paul, of his faint smile on the phone. I thought of wills, of arrangements, of words like soul air. I thought of Marianne's hands stirring in our kitchen. And for the first time, I called what was creeping around inside me by its name. Suspicion. I took the jam jar from the fridge and held it up to the light. Tiny particles floated in it, as if the liquid wasn't just liquid. I screwed the lid back on tightly, put it back, grabbed my jacket and keys, and left. I didn't know where I was going yet, just away from the helplessness, toward an answer. Outside, the air smelled of wet leaves and metal. I pulled up my collar and made a second silent promise to myself. If John doesn't believe me now, I'll keep collecting until the truth is no longer a question. Until even he, who has never doubted his mother's intentions, has to see what is happening right before our eyes. On the way to the bus stop, my phone vibrated. A message in the family group chat. From Marianne. "Stopping by briefly again this evening. I've prepared something very mild for John. Good for the nerves." I stopped. I looked at the screen. My fingers went cold. Then I wrote, "We're looking forward to it." I heard my own heart in my footsteps on the sidewalk. I knew this was just the beginning, and I, Lisa, would no longer let myself be told that bitterness is a natural flavor. I would follow the aftertaste to its source. It was as if by saying that word suspicion, I had flipped a switch. Since then, I couldn't just pretend everything was normal anymore. I stood in the bathroom in the morning, putting on makeup for work, and as I drew the eyeliner, I saw the question in my own gaze. Are you overreacting, Lisa? Or are you finally seeing clearly? John noticed I was quieter. "Is everything okay?" he would ask when he was loading the dishwasher or tying his shoes. "Yes," I would answer, and the yes sounded so thin that I could barely believe it myself. Marianne came over again on Friday evening. "Just for a bit," she had written. In her language, just for a bit always meant at least an hour. This time she brought a bowl of potato casserole. "With nutmeg, John," she said. "You love nutmeg, don't you?" Her voice dripped with affection. I set the table. John ate, even laughed when Marianne made another sharp remark about my agency work. "Well, Lisa, that's more of a hobby than a career, isn't it?" I bit my tongue while John waved it off. After dinner, Marianne left with the usual, "Call me if it gets to be too much for you," a phrase that meant exactly the opposite. 2 hours later, John was sitting in the living room, his head in his hands. "I'm dizzy," he mumbled. "Maybe I ate too much." I sat next to him, placed a hand on his back. Or maybe I swallowed the rest. He didn't want to hear it. Not yet. Later, when he was asleep, I took out my list again. Saturday, soup plus pesto, headaches, nausea. Monday, tea, extreme fatigue. Friday, casserole, dizziness. I saw the arrows I had drawn and the pattern that was emerging. Visit, food, sickness. I sat there for a long time in the light of the kitchen lamp and listened to John's restless breathing coming through the wall. It didn't sound like sleep. It sounded like a struggle. On Sunday morning at breakfast, I made another attempt. "John," I began, "have you ever thought that it might be the food your mom brings with her?" He looked at me in surprise, a bagel in his hand. "What do you mean?" "Well," I said carefully, "every time she's here, you feel worse afterward. I wrote it down." He put down the bagel and looked at me for a long time. "Lisa, please, do you honestly believe my mom would do something to me?" "I don't know," I mumbled, "but there's a pattern." He sighed, got up, and went to the window. "My mom can be exhausting, yes, but she would never—" He turned around. "You sound paranoid." The word hit me harder than I expected. Paranoid. I pressed my lips together and nodded. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not." We were silent about the topic for the rest of the day. He called his father in the evening, who sounded weak but loving. I sat next to him, only hearing his half of the conversation. "Yeah, Dad, yeah, I'll take care of Mom." Take care of Mom. I wrote it down on my list without knowing exactly why. And as I put the pen down, I swore to myself, if John wouldn't listen to me, then I would find evidence that was so clear he couldn't look away anymore. I kept asking myself, why only John? Why not me? I ate from the dishes too. Soup, cake, casserole. I at least tried a bit of everything. And yet, he was the only one who ended up in bed with dizziness or nausea. The answer was probably in the details. I took smaller portions, often just trying them out of politeness. John, on the other hand, ate with a huge appetite, always more than me. And then I remembered something else. Marianne insisted that John got her portions. She would literally push for him to take a lot of the broth, a lot of the pesto, a lot of the cake. "This will make you strong, my boy," she would say and smile. Me? She never put that much on my plate. Sometimes I even saw her almost imperceptibly push the better corner of the casserole, the good part of the cake, toward John, as if I were just an accessory, politely eating a little bit, but not important. And maybe, I thought one evening, that was the point. Maybe what was in the food was in my portion in such a small amount that it had little effect. But on John's plate, in his cup, it was concentrated, and a little more each time. I decided not to just take notes anymore. Words on paper were nothing against what John called paranoia. I needed proof. Something I could one day wordlessly place on the table in front of him. A jar, a piece of cake, a smell that couldn't be argued away. The first jar was already in the fridge, the rest of Marianne's nerve tea. I had labeled it like a researcher naming mice. Marianne's tea. 3. It was ridiculous, and yet I felt stronger since it had been there. During her next visit, she came with a casserole. "This is filling and strengthening," she said, as if a magic spell were on her lips. I stood with her in the kitchen, pretending to put away silverware, and watched her hands. How she seasoned, how she stirred. Her movements were calm, precise. But twice she briefly reached into her purse as if she wanted to sprinkle something else in. I couldn't see it clearly, just the tiny movement, the flick of her wrist. After dinner, when John was already on the sofa, feeling weak as he often did, I was alone in the kitchen again. I took a small portion from the casserole dish, put it in a Tupperware container, and labeled it Casserole M2. Then I pushed it into the fridge, behind the milk, where John would never find it. I started to look at Marianne with different eyes. Her friendliness had never been genuine. I had known that for a long time. But now, It seemed like a mask. Behind every smile, I looked for the shadow that would expose her. Once, when she set a bowl of broth in front of me, she touched my hand and said, "You have to take good care of him. He needs you." Her voice was warm, but her eyes, they briefly glanced past my shoulder, as if I were just an extra in her play. John, however, didn't want to hear any of it. "I have a headache again," he complained one Tuesday evening after a visit from Mary Ann. I sat down next to him, took his hand. "John, please, you have to believe me. It's always after her food." He smiled faintly. "Lisa, you're looking for patterns because you're scared. But my mom, she just wants to help." "Does she?" I asked softly. He sighed, pulled the blanket over his head. "Let's not fight." I stayed by his side for a long time, listening to his restless breathing and thinking, it's not a fight when only one person is fighting. At night, when he was asleep, I would sometimes get up, go to the fridge, and take out the samples. I arranged them side by side on the kitchen table, jars, containers, labeled with the date and content. A small collection of suspicions. I smelled them once I even tasted a drop. Bitter. So bitter that I immediately drank water to get rid of the taste. And then I asked myself, how far am I willing to go? Should I take this to a lab? Should I get help? Or should I wait until one day it's too late? On a Saturday, when Mary Ann was here again, it happened. She had brewed tea, poured it into the mugs, smiled, and talked about trivial things. Then, I swear I saw it, she dissolved something in John's cup. A tiny moment, barely visible, a small drop from a glass bottle. My heart raced. I knew that if I said something now, John would think I was crazy. So I stayed silent. I just conspicuously pushed my cup away and didn't drink. Mary Ann saw it. A quick, narrow glance. Not a word. And John? He drank. That night, he was in bed again with chills. I sat next to him, held his hand, and my thoughts swirled. If you don't believe me, John, then I'll get you out of this game anyway. On my own, if necessary. I swore to myself, next time, I would not just quietly observe, I would intervene. I took the next day off. Officially, because a project fell through. In reality, because the ground beneath my feet had become too soft. I felt that if I continued for one more day, smiling, cooking, comforting, sleeping, without doing anything, I would eventually just fall into myself and not get up again. Portland was gray, a fine rain hung in the air like breath. I pulled my hood over my head and started walking, without a destination. I had watered Ing and Ilsa. The thermos with the rest of the tea was in the back of the fridge. The containers were labeled. The list was in the kitchen drawer. My evidence, my small, silent archive. I stopped in front of the pharmacy on the corner. I stared at the windows with their colorful packages and posters that promised gentle relief and thought, maybe it's not malicious at all. Maybe it's just ignorant. Maybe Mary Ann is overdoing it with her herbs. Maybe she's mixing things that just aren't good in combination. Maybe she really means well, but her well is different from mine. I clung to that thought because it was warmer than the other one. Inside, it smelled of alcohol and soap. Behind the counter stood a pharmacist with rimless glasses, a kind, tired face. "Good morning," he said. "How can I help you?" I held on to the edge of the counter. "I have an unusual question," I began, heard my voice was too quiet, and cleared my throat. My husband often gets herbal teas, soups, these family remedies from his mother, and afterward he often feels unwell. Dizziness, nausea, extreme fatigue. Could that come from herbs? He took off his glasses, placed them on the counter, and looked at me. "It can," he said calmly. "It depends on the amount, the combination, the preparation. Some plants seem harmless, but can cause problems in high doses. And some things that are called healing herbs in kitchen circles are quite potent in a medical dose. He made a small gesture with his hand as if to avoid the word dangerous. But that's very general. Your description is nonspecific. I know, I said, and noticed tears welling up in my eyes. I don't want to accuse anyone either. I just want to know how I can find out what the cause is. He nodded slowly, as if he had heard this question in many forms before. I can't analyze anything here in the dispensary, he said. But if you have a concrete suspicion that there's something in the food or teas that isn't good, you should talk to a doctor. There are poison control centers. They also provide advice if something might not be tolerated. And, he tilted his head, continuing in a softer voice, keep samples if you feel there's a pattern. Don't alter them. Don't pour them into other containers. Store them in a cool place. I nodded. I'm doing that, I said, and was startled by myself, by that cold, sober, I'm already doing that. He looked at me as if he had understood without me saying much. One more thing, he added. If your husband has symptoms, get him medically checked. His circulation, blood work, liver values. Don't wait. He paused. And talk to him. Not just about you-know-what, also about his boundaries. Mother's boundaries are sometimes elastic. I took a deep breath. Thank you, I said. That helps. Outside, I wiped my eyes with my sleeve. I sat on the steps in front of the pharmacy and, with numb fingers, dialed a number on my phone. The Oregon Poison Center. I heard my heart as if it were beating in the receiver. A calm voice answered, asking about my concern. I described it carefully, without names, without accusations. I don't know if I'm overreacting, I concluded, but there's this pattern, and I'm scared. You did the right thing by calling, the voice said, factual, comforting. If symptoms appear, get a medical checkup immediately. Don't throw away any samples. And no self-diagnoses. We don't give an assessment on hypothetical substances, but we strongly advise medical examination, documentation. The voice calmly repeated what I needed. Don't be alone. Don't suppress it. Get it professionally checked. I took notes like a student. When I hung up, I called the only person who never put me in a corner, Sophie. We've known each other since college. Sophie has a way of listening that asks for nothing. Come over, she said. I'll make coffee, and I'll listen to you without telling you that you're crazy. In her living room in Portland's Hawthorne neighborhood, it smelled of candles and freshly polished wood floors. Sophie was wearing an oversized wool sweater. She pulled me close and held me for a moment longer than you usually do. Tell me everything, I told her. About the pesto, the tea, the casserole, the thermos, the drop from the glass bottle, about John's fatigue, the list, the pharmacy, the poison center. I talked until my throat burned and drank her coffee, which tasted of peace. What does John say? She finally asked. I stared at my hands. He thinks I'm anxious. Paranoid was the word. Sophie's face twisted. Classic. When your intuition is too strong, they like to call it panic. And you're the organized, factual one. She paused. Lisa, I'll tell you something. You know I don't dramatize. If you're talking like this, there's something there. And if there's something there, you need two things. Documentation. And an ally in the family. In his family? I asked blankly. Who? Isn't there that aunt who never really got along with Marianne? What's her name? Teresa? I lifted my head. Aunt Teresa, Paul's younger sister, the woman who stayed quiet at family gatherings but saw everything. The one who once secretly slipped me a candy when I had fled the room during my first Christmas with Marianne's sharp remarks. Yes, I said, Teresa. Call her. I shook my head. What am I supposed to say? I think your sister-in-law is making my husband sick? Say, you're worried. Say, you need advice, that's all. Sophie placed her hand on my forearm. And go see Paul. If you want to see how Marianne operates, go there. In the afternoon, I drove to Gresham. The interstate was slow. The sky was falling lower. The Webbers' townhouse was at the end of a quiet street. The same stones in the front yards, the same boxwood bushes, the same neighborhood politeness. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Marianne opened the door. "Lisa!" Her voice almost pitched. "How nice! You could have texted, but come in, come in." I stepped into the hallway. The smell hit me as always. A mix of lavender, floor wax, and something I couldn't name. Bitter in the back of my nose. I imagined how this smell settles into fabrics, into walls, into people. "Paul is sleeping," Marianne said. "He's having a bad day today." She said it as one would say, "The rain has its own order." "Can I see him for a moment?" I asked. She hesitated, only for an instant, then nodded. "Of course." Her hand glided over my back, a steering motion. "Just not for too long." Paul lay in the darkened bedroom, his skin thin as paper, his hands on the blanket. I sat on the edge of the bed and took his fingers in mine. "Hello, Papa Paul," I whispered. I had called him Papa since our wedding, and he always smiled about it as if it were a joke only the two of us understood. His eyelids twitched. "Lisa," came the toneless sound, and I swallowed. "I'm here," I said. "I'm taking care of John." I sat for a while, talking about the bus, about Inga and Ilsa, about nothing. When I stood up, I thought I saw a tiny nod. Maybe I had imagined it. I took it with me anyway. In the kitchen, Marianne was busy. On the table lay dried bundles of herbs, neatly tied together with twine. On small tin boxes were labels: St. John's wort, yarrow, lemon balm. I didn't pick up the boxes, but I looked at them. Behind the boxes was a brown bottle without a label. When I looked at it, Marianne casually slid it into the cabinet. It was such a small movement, so practiced, that one could have missed it. Not me. "I'm going to make some tea in a minute," she said. "For Paul, but I'll make a cup for you too. You young women are always so rushed. This will calm you down." "Thank you," I said, and felt my throat go dry. My phone vibrated. Teresa. I had sent her a cautious message beforehand. "I'm at Marianne's today. Could I see you for a quick minute?" "Lisa," Teresa said softly on the phone. "I could take a walk around the block right now, if you need some fresh air. The corner by the playground." I grabbed my jacket. "I'm going out for a bit," I said to Marianne. "For some fresh air." She nodded, already holding the kettle. "Do that." Outside, it smelled of damp earth. Teresa was standing by the fence of the small playground in a dark blue coat, her gray hair in a bun. Her eyes were more alert than I remembered them. "You're worried," she said, without a question mark. "Yes." We walked side by side, slowly. I didn't tell her everything. Just enough. Teresa was silent until I was finished. Then she stopped. "Lisa," she said, "I suspected a lot. Not this, but—" She searched for words. "Marianne is, let's say, possessive, especially when she feels something is slipping away from her." "Paul is slipping away from her," I said, and noticed how harsh it sounded. Teresa nodded. "He's very sick. There is—" She pressed her lips together. "There is a will. Not that I like to gossip about things like this, but you need to know the situation. Years ago, Paul arranged for his estate. If John lives after him, there's a 30-day grace period or something like that. John gets a share that he can manage independently. If John doesn't live, everything goes to Marianne. It was supposed to be a safeguard for the boy. At the time, no one thought that—" She trailed off. "John is an only child, you know that." I had to sink onto the back of the park bench. I knew John was an only child, but that— I felt dizzy. 30 days, a grace period, a loophole, or a motive. "I'm not saying Marianne is doing anything," Teresa said hastily, as if she had read my thoughts. "I'm just saying she has a strong idea of how things should be, and sometimes—" She held up her hands. "Sometimes she confuses love with control." "Sometimes," I said tonelessly. Teresa placed a hand on my forearm. "Take care of yourself," and of John. If you observe something specific, don't go alone. Find witnesses or go to the police. But please, no solo missions that make you vulnerable." I nodded. "Thank you." When I went back into the house, the tea was steaming on the table. 2 cups. "Please," Marianne said softly. "Drink, for your nerves." I'll drink it later," I said. "I have to go." I smiled as if I had a bus to catch that was never coming. On the way home, I called Dr. Thompson, our family doctor, a man with the patience of a tree. "I'd like to make an appointment for my husband," I said. "He's had repeated dizziness, nausea, and extreme fatigue for weeks, always after—" I bit my tongue. "Always in phases." "Come in tomorrow at 8 before office hours," he said. "Then we can talk quietly. Bring him with you." I don't know if he'll come." "Bring him," Dr. Thompson said gently, and I had to laugh even though I didn't feel like it. That evening at dinner, I said to John, "Can we go to Dr. Thompson's tomorrow morning, just to be safe? Blood work, circulation. I need that, for my peace of mind." He looked at me for a long time. "For your peace of mind? And for your body." He rubbed his forehead and sighed. "Okay," he said. "Okay." I almost cried with relief. I slept poorly, counting the hours until morning. In a waking minute, I got up, went to the kitchen, and got my containers out of the fridge. I arranged them by date, took photos with my phone, and placed a small notebook next to them. Date, time, what it was, symptom, duration. It seemed crazy, pedantic, and over the top. It was the only thing that kept me calm. I thought of Marianne's hands, of the brown bottle, of Teresa's words. 30-day grace period. I heard them like a sentence being carried down a hallway, lingering under every door. I also thought of Paul in his dark room, of the thin skin over his hands, of the quiet Lisa. I thought that this family was made of threads that were pulled so tight that they would snap when one of them broke. I lay down next to John again. He turned to me, even in his sleep, put his arm over me as if I were his shore. "I've got you," I whispered into the darkness, "and I'm not letting go." In the morning, we sat in Dr. Thompson's waiting room. John was flipping through a magazine whose cover showed a wave frozen in the sun. I looked at him, this man I had chosen, whom I had married, with whom I named plants. I thought, we are a story that no one else is allowed to tell but the two of us, and yet there's someone sitting there with a brown bottle, secretly taking notes. Dr. Thompson let us in early. He listened. He asked questions. "How often? Since when? Which foods? What happens afterward?" He nodded at my list. "It's good that you wrote that down." Then he examined John, measured his blood pressure and pulse, listened to his heart and lungs, and drew some blood. "I don't see anything drastic at the moment," he said, "but we'll wait for the lab results. And," he looked at John, "you should eat what you want, not what others put in front of you. If you don't feel good after certain things, stop eating them." John smiled sheepishly. "My mom means well." "That's not the question," Dr. Thompson said kindly. "The question is, how do you feel afterward? Listen to your body, not to labels." When we were outside, John walked beside me in silence. Finally, he said, "I'm not your experiment." "You're my husband," I said. "And I'm trying not to lose you." He stopped. "Lisa." He looked at me, a mixture of fatigue and something I couldn't read. "Sometimes I don't know if you're trying to save me or suffocate me." It hurt. It hurt so much that I briefly couldn't breathe. "Maybe I can't neatly separate the two," I said. "I'm trying." He nodded, took a step toward me, and put his forehead against mine. "I know." When we got home, Marianne wrote in the family group chat, "I'm stopping by for a bit this afternoon, John. I have something very mild for you, a little something. It will help you sleep better." I looked at the sentence as if it were lying on my kitchen table. Then I wrote back very calmly, "Feel free to come at 5." I stood in the kitchen. I didn't clean. I didn't organize. I didn't touch anything. I leaned both hands on the countertop and said aloud into the empty room, "Not anymore." I took my old phone from the drawer, the one with the slightly shaky camera, and placed it on the fridge, half hidden between the tea tins, so the lens pointed at the counter. I turned on the recording and heard my heart beat twice, once in my chest and once in this silent, false eye. I wasn't proud of it. I was a woman who was secretly filming because otherwise she couldn't make anyone believe what she was seeing. I was a woman who had to collect evidence to protect her husband from his own mother. Shortly before 5, I heard footsteps in the stairwell. Marianne was humming. She always hummed just before she unlocked the door. I put my hand on the fridge as if I had to calm it down. "Shh," I whispered, and then she was standing in our kitchen. Beige coat, lipstick, a smile. "Well, my dears," she said, "I brought something very mild." She held up the bag. "This will help, for the nerves." I looked at her and thought, I brought something too. A boundary, and I felt something inside me become calm. Not cold. Calm, like water when the wind dies down. "That's nice," I said. "Let's get this cooking." At exactly 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I had already turned on the old phone on the fridge. The red light was barely visible. The battery didn't last long, but an hour would be enough. My heart pounded all the way to my fingertips when I heard the key in the lock. "Well, my dears." Marianne stood in the doorway, as always, her coat beige, lipstick flawless, hair freshly styled. In her hand, a bag from which something rattled. "I have a little something to strengthen my boy." John came from the living room, smiling tiredly. "Hello, Mom." He gave her a brief hug, and she squeezed him tighter than necessary. "You look pale," she immediately stated. "Just right that I brought something with me." I stayed in the kitchen, forcing myself to seem calm. My hands were on the countertop, completely loose, as if I had nothing to hide. Marianne pulled a Tupperware container from the bag and opened it. A little herbal rice, light, easy to digest, and with a sauce that's good for the nerves. She placed a small jar on the table with a dark liquid. "Sit down, John," she said. "I'll get a plate ready for you." "Thanks, Mom," he mumbled. I took a step back, leaned against the wall. I observed. Her movements were smooth, self-assured. She opened the container, ladled rice onto the plate, and poured sauce over it. Then, barely visible, she reached to the side where her purse was standing. A tiny moment. A small bottle flashed. A drop, right onto the plate, before she stirred the sauce. My breath caught. I pressed my lips together so that no sound would escape. "Here, my dear," she said softly, and placed the plate in front of John. "Eat. You'll feel better right away." He took the fork and began to eat. I watched him chew, swallow, and smile. "Tastes good." "Of course," Marianne said. She stroked his arm, her gaze fixed on me, a look that lasted longer than it should have, as if she knew I had seen it. I forced myself to smile as well. "Very tasty," I heard myself say, even though I felt sick. "I'll try some later." Marianne nodded, satisfied. An hour after her visit, John was lying on the sofa again. Pale, his forehead damp, his hands shaky. "I'm dizzy again," he mumbled. "Maybe it is a bug after all." I brought him water and placed a cool cloth on his forehead. "Rest," I whispered, while a storm raged inside me. When he finally fell asleep, I crept into the kitchen. My hands trembled as I took the phone from the fridge. I stopped the recording, took a deep breath, and let it out slowly. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and pressed play. The picture was shaky, blurry, but you could see it very clearly. Marianne, taking the small bottle from her purse, and a drop falling onto the plate before she stirred everything in. I felt my body get hot and cold at the same time. There it was, the proof. I sat there for a long time, staring at the small screen. 1,000 thoughts swirled in my head. Do I show it to John? Do I believe he'll believe me? Or will I destroy his image of his mother in one blow? The kitchen was silent, only the fridge hummed. And I knew. From now on, there was no turning back. I waited until John seemed more awake the next morning. The night had been restless. He had groaned and turned over again and again, beads of sweat on his forehead. I wiped them off, brought him water, and held his hand, and all the while the phone was a burning secret in my drawer. "Lisa?" He looked at me, his eyes tired but warm. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I said. I sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand. "John, I have to show you something." He frowned. "Right now? I have a headache." "Especially now," I interrupted softly, "because it's about your headache, about you." I stood up, got the phone, and sat down again. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the video. "Please, just watch it, just once. After that, you can still tell me I'm crazy." He looked at me, then at the screen. I pressed play. The recording ran. You could see Marianne, blurry but recognizable. You could see her preparing the plate. You could see the hand that briefly reached into the purse, the small bottle, the drop. John's face changed as he watched. First disbelief, then anger, then something that looked like pain. He stopped. "That could be anything. Maybe vitamins or a herbal extract. My mom does that. She knows a lot about home remedies." "John," my voice almost broke, "you saw it. She secretly put something in your food. Secretly. If it was just vitamins, she would have told you." "Maybe she didn't want to worry you," he defended. "You're sensitive about things like that." I stared at him. Sensitive? I felt tears well up in my eyes. "You're lying here every week with dizziness, with nausea, with headaches, always after her visits. And I'm the one who's sensitive?" He ran a hand through his hair, stood up, and walked a few steps through the room. "That's my mother, Lisa. My mother. She raised me. She was always there for me." His voice broke. "You can't expect me to just believe she wants to harm me." "I expect you to take care of yourself," I whispered, "to see what's happening. I don't want to lose you, John." He stopped and turned to me. His gaze was full of inner conflict. "What if you're wrong? What if you're overreacting in your fear and wrongly accusing my mother?" I held out the phone to him. "Then explain this to me. Explain to me why she does it secretly. Explain to me why you're always sick when she's been here. I'm begging you, John. Open your eyes." He looked at the phone, then at me, and I felt something in him fighting. Loyalty versus reason. Blood versus love. I don't know," he said softly. "I just don't know." I stood up, went to him, and placed my hands on his face. "You have to choose, John. Not between her and me, but between blind trust and your own life." He looked at me, and tears shone in his eyes. "Give me time." "Time," I repeated, more bitterly than I wanted to. "Time is exactly what we might not have." I left him in the bedroom, went to the kitchen, and leaned against the countertop. My legs felt like they couldn't hold me anymore. The phone lay in my hand like a piece of truth that was both heavy and useless. I knew evidence alone wasn't enough. I had to dig deeper, find out why Marianne was doing this. And I suspected that the answer wasn't in my fridge, but in the shadows of John's family, with Paul, with his will, with what Marianne desperately wanted to claim for herself. The days after the recording were a single balancing act, between the everyday and the abyss, between smiling and screaming inside. John went to work, pretending everything was normal. Me too. But the video lay between us like an invisible wedge. We barely spoke about it anymore. And yet it was in every glance. I knew, if I wanted to save John, I had to understand why Marianne was doing this. No one poisons their own son without a reason. The answer came from Aunt Teresa. I had texted her a few days after our conversation. "Can we meet? Alone." She replied curtly, "Tomorrow, 4 p.m., at the coffee shop by the city park." The coffee shop was old-fashioned, with white tablecloths and drip coffee served in thick porcelain mugs. Teresa was already sitting there, a gray coat over the back of the chair, her hands folded. Her eyes were watchful. "Lisa," she began softly. Barely had I sat down. "You have to be careful. I know you're collecting evidence, but Marianne isn't stupid. She'll notice if you were watching her." "I filmed something," I confessed. "How she put a drop from a bottle into John's food." Teresa closed her eyes, as if she had to endure a sting. "I suspected it. But to this extent," she exhaled. "Then there's no more doubt." I leaned forward. "But why? Why would a mother do something like that to her own son?" Teresa was silent for a long time, stirring her coffee without drinking it. Then she said, "Because of Paul, and because of the will." She explained how Paul had arranged everything years ago. A notarized will, clearly worded. After his death, the estate would be divided, half to Marianne, the other half to John. He wanted to make sure John was independent, even if Marianne wanted to take everything for herself. But there was a clause, a kind of legal loophole. If John also dies within 30 days of Paul's death, Teresa explained, then his share automatically reverts to Marianne. Without any detours, without any heir, everything would go to her. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my throat. That means if Paul dies, and John dies shortly afterward too, Marianne gets everything. The house, the accounts, the securities, everything. I felt dizzy. "And you believe—" Teresa nodded earnestly. "I believe that Marianne wants everything for herself. Always has. Control, possessions, power, that was her life's motto. And now that she's losing Paul, she's clinging to the only thing she has left, the money, the house, the security. In her eyes, that justifies everything." I closed my eyes. Paul's weak hands, the sweat on John's forehead, Marianne's voice, good for the nerves. Everything suddenly formed a cruel pattern. "John doesn't believe me," I whispered. "He always defends her." Teresa placed her hand on mine. "Then you have to show him the motive. He doesn't know about the clause. Paul never wanted to make things complicated. He just told John, 'You're taken care of. But the details, only Marianne knows those, and I do.'" I nodded. "Then that's the key." Teresa looked me deep in the eyes. "Lisa, you're strong, but be careful. Marianne has already noticed that you're in her way, and people who go that far, they won't hesitate to go after you too." A shiver ran down my spine. For the first time, I felt that not only John was in danger, but me as well. When I went home later, the city was full of sounds, buses, honking cars, children's laughter. Everything seemed normal. Only inside me was nothing normal anymore. I knew now Marianne had a motive, a dark, ugly motive, and I knew I had to act, before it was too late. I don't know if it was courage or madness when I called Marianne. "Can you come over tomorrow?" I asked as calmly as I could. "Of course, my dear," she answered, and I heard the fake smile through the line. "I'll bring something light for John." I hung up and stared at my phone for a long time. Light. There was always poison in her words. The next day, she stood at our door at 5 on the dot. "Lisa," she said as I opened it, "you look so pretty today." Her eyes darted over my face, searching, testing. "Come in," I said curtly. John was still at work, on purpose. I didn't want him there. This time, I had to talk to her alone. In the kitchen, Marianne placed a Tupperware container on the table. "Vegetable soup, for John's stomach." "Leave it," I said. My voice was calm, almost cold. "He won't eat it." Her eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by that?" I took a deep breath. "I know what you're doing, Marianne. I saw it. I filmed it." A twitch went across her face. Then she laughed briefly, sharply. "Filmed? Oh, Lisa, you're a woman with a great imagination." "Imagination?" I took the phone from my pocket and held it up. "A drop from your bottle right into John's plate. Secretly. Do you really want to tell me that was harmless?" For a moment, she was silent. Her eyes gleamed. Then she sat down, her hands folded on the table. "And what if it was?" she asked. Her voice was low but ice cold. "What are you going to do about it?" My breath caught. No more denial, no more feigned horror, just that cold question. "Why?" I whispered. "Why are you doing this to your own son?" She smiled, a smile that had nothing to do with warmth. "Because he's in the way." My heart skipped a beat. "In the way? For what?" "For what belongs to me," she said calmly. "When Paul dies, and he'll die soon, then everything is mine. The house, the money, the security I've earned, but only if John isn't there anymore. It's that simple." I felt sick to my stomach. "That's crazy." "No," she countered. "That's justice. I've given my life to this family. I sacrificed myself. I cared for Paul. I kept this house running. And now I want what is due to me. John is young. He has you. He doesn't need all this. He needs his life," my voice cracked. "He's your son, for goodness sake." For a fraction of a second, something flickered in her gaze. Maybe guilt, maybe pain. Then it was gone. "You don't understand," she said softly. "You're just an outsider. You'll leave someday. But I will remain." I stood there trembling with the phone in my hand. For the first time, I understood that I was facing a woman who knew no more boundaries. "If you give him something else, ever again," I whispered, "I swear to you, Marianne, I'm going to the police, and then you will lose everything. Everything." She leaned forward, so close I could smell her perfume, that heavy, sweet scent. "Be careful, Lisa," she said. "Be very careful. Sometimes the right people lose, sometimes the wrong ones. Be sure you're on the right side." Then she stood up, took the Tupperware container, and left. Her footsteps echoed through the hallway. The door slammed shut. I was left alone in the kitchen, my heart racing, my knees weak. I knew. It was no longer a suspicion, no longer a pattern, no longer a coincidence. It was a fight, and it had just begun. When John came home late that evening, I was still in the kitchen. I hadn't even turned on the light. Only the small lamp above the sink was on. The phone lay next to me on the table, a silent witness to what had happened. "Lisa?" He put down his bag and came closer. "What are you doing here in the dark?" I lifted my head. My voice sounded strange, hoarse. "Your mom was here." He smiled tiredly. "I know. She texted that she was bringing soup. She told me everything." He stopped. "What?" I took a deep breath, felt my hands trembling. "That she's making you sick, that she's mixing something into your food. And why?" He frowned, slowly sat down opposite me. "Lisa." "John, listen to me." My voice cracked. "She wants you to die, so she can inherit everything alone when your father is gone." For a moment, there was silence. Then he laughed, a short, disbelieving laugh. That's insane! My mom? The woman who raised me? Who's been at Dad's bedside for years?" I slapped my hand on the table. "I saw it! I filmed it! And today, she told me to my face." His smile disappeared. "What? What did she say?" I quoted her words, every single one, as cold as they had fallen. "John is in the way. When Paul dies, everything belongs to me." John's face changed. He stared at the table as if he were afraid to meet my gaze. That can't be true." His voice was barely audible. "John," I whispered, and tears burned in my eyes. "I know she's your mom, but I swear to you, she wants to harm you. I have evidence. I have her confession. You have to believe me." He jumped up, paced the room, running both hands through his hair. "You're asking me to believe my mom wants to kill me. How am I supposed to accept that? How? I'm only asking you to trust yourself." I also stood up, grabbed his hand. "Remember, every time she was here, you felt bad. Not before, not after, just then. Your body is screaming the truth in your face, and you're refusing to look." His hand trembled in mine. He looked at me, his eyes full of conflict. "She's my mom, Lisa. My mom. I can't just see her as a monster. And I'm your wife, I whispered. I don't want to lose you. If you defend her, you're risking your life. He closed his eyes, pressed his lips together for a long time. Then he whispered, I don't know who to believe. I let go of his hand and took a step back. Then look at the recording. Look at what I saw, and then decide. He nodded, barely visibly. Tomorrow. No, I said harshly. Now. But he went into the bedroom without turning around. I was left alone in the kitchen, the phone still in front of me. Tears ran down my cheeks, hot and heavy. It was as if John were standing between two women, and each was pulling at him, one with love, the other with poison. And I knew, if he didn't decide soon, it would tear him apart. The night was quiet, too quiet. I lay next to John in bed, listening to his breathing, shallow, restless, not true sleep. My eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, and the phone lay on my nightstand as if it knew it wouldn't let us rest until John had seen it. In the morning, over coffee, the air was heavy. John looked like he hadn't slept for a minute. His skin was pale, his eyes red. I put his mug down in front of him and sat opposite him. John, I began softly, we have to get some clarity now. You have to watch the recording. He lifted his head, his gaze empty, exhausted. And what if I do? If I see what you're claiming? Then I lose everything. The mother I knew, the trust I had. What will I have left then? Me, I whispered. Us. That's what you'll have. And your life. He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. Show me. I took the phone, opened the file. His hands trembled as he took it. He pressed play. The video ran, blurry, shaky, but clear enough. Marianne, arranging the plate, her hand discreetly reaching into her purse, the small drop from the bottle, barely visible, but there. John's face changed as he watched, first a tense expression, then blank horror. He stopped the video, rewound, and played it again, and again. No, he whispered. That can't be. That's not her. She would never. His voice broke. He pressed his hands to his face, breathing heavily. Oh, God. I carefully placed my hand on his arm. It is her, John. You see it yourself. Why? His voice was barely more than a croak. Why would she do something like that? I'm her son. Because it's not about you, I said softly. It's about the inheritance, about the house, the money, the security. She wants everything for herself. He shook his head, tears running down his cheeks. But she loves me. I know she loves me. I felt it my whole life. Maybe she loves you in her own way, I whispered. But her greed is bigger. She doesn't see you. She only sees what she could lose. John stood up, almost stumbling, supporting himself on the table. I can't do this. I can't believe that my mom... He stopped, hitting the edge of the table with his fist. Damn it! I also stood up, wrapped my arms around him. He let it happen, sinking into my embrace like a child who no longer knows where to go. You're not alone, I whispered. We'll get through this together. But you can't be blind anymore, John. Otherwise, you'll lose everything. He nodded, barely perceptibly. I need time. We don't have time, I answered gently. Paul is very sick, and when he dies, then she'll be in even more of a hurry. He pulled back, sat heavily on the sofa, his head in his hands. I sat down next to him and said nothing more. We sat in long silence while the bus rumbled by outside and life went on as if nothing had happened. Inside me, relief mixed with fear. He had seen the truth, but I knew. It wasn't over. It was just the beginning. It took John 2 days to be ready. 2 days in which he barely spoke, barely ate, just walked through the apartment like a ghost. I let him be. I knew that words were of no help in moments like these. He had to decide for himself. On the 3rd day, he suddenly put the mug he was holding down and said, Call her. Tell her to come over." His voice was soft but firm. I nodded. An hour later, Marianne was standing in our kitchen, just as she so often did. Perfectly dressed, hair gleaming, a small smile on her lips. "John, my dear, you look pale. I brought you some broth. It will give you strength." John sat at the table, his hands clasped together. He looked at her, and in his gaze was something I had never seen in him before: determination. "Mom," he said calmly, "sit down." Marianne blinked, irritated, but did as she was told. "What's wrong? You both look like you're at a funeral." "Maybe we are," John replied. "The funeral of our trust." She gave a short, nervous laugh. "What is that supposed to mean?" I stood beside him, placed my hand on his shoulder. He took a deep breath. "I saw a video of you. You were putting a drop of something into my food, secretly. Do you want to explain what that was?" For a moment, there was silence. Marianne blinked as if to buy time. Then she smiled again, thinly. "Oh, John, that was just a little herbal extract. Calming. You're so stressed. I just wanted to help you." "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice trembled. "Why secretly?" She was silent. "Because it wasn't calming, Mom," he continued. "It made me sick, over and over again, after every visit." Her lips pressed together. She avoided my gaze. "Tell me, Mom." John's voice now broke. "Why are you doing this to me?" And then it came, cold, clear, without shame. "Because you're in the way," she said. John froze. I squeezed his shoulder tighter, feeling his body shake. "In the way?" he whispered. "For what?" "For my life," Marianne retorted. "When your father dies, everything belongs to me, unless you're still here. Then I have to share. And I have been sharing my whole life, John. With your father, with you, with everyone. Now I finally want everything for myself." John's face was ashen. "You would kill me. Your own son." "You don't understand." Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "It's not about you. It's about survival, about security, about what's due to me." I took a step forward. "What's due to you? What's due to you is a spot in prison, Marianne." She looked at me, her eyes cold. "Do you really think anyone will believe you? A daughter-in-law against a mother?" I raised John. I nourished him, protected him, did everything for him. And you're just the woman who would have left someday. "I'm not leaving," I countered. "But you're leaving now, and you're never coming back here." John slowly rose, swaying, but his voice was clear. "Mom, you're no longer my mother. Not if you can do something like this to me." Marianne stared at him as if he had slapped her. For a moment, pain flickered in her eyes. Then she stood up and grabbed her purse. "You'll see," she hissed. "You'll see who loses everything in the end." Then she was gone. The door slammed shut behind her. John slumped back into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "God, Lisa, she really wanted to." I put my arms around him. "Yes," I whispered, "but she lost. Because you finally saw it." We held each other for a long time, while the city roared outside as if nothing had happened. But inside us, everything was different. The next morning, even before the sun came up over Portland, John said in a hoarse voice, "We have to go see Dad." I nodded immediately. I had had the same thought, but hadn't dared to voice it. We drove to Gresham. The streets were empty. The world lay in a gray haze. John was silent the entire drive, staring out the window, his hands clenched on the steering wheel. I felt his tension, his pain. He was driving to a man who was dying, and he had to tell him that his own wife had tried to poison their son. When we arrived, the house was quiet. Aunt Teresa was already there. She opened the door for us. "He's awake," she said softly. "But weak. You have to hurry." We went into the bedroom. Paul was lying there, even thinner than at my last visit. His eyes were half closed, but when John stepped beside him, he opened them. "My boy," he breathed, a smile on his lips. John knelt by the bed, taking his father's hand. "Dad, there's something you need to know." His voice broke. "It's about Mom." Paul's gaze became questioning, almost watchful. I sat on the other side of the bed and placed my hand on his. "Paul, Marianne is giving things to John that are making him sick. We saw it. She wants him to be gone when you die. So she gets everything." A shadow crossed Paul's face. He closed his eyes and breathed heavily. I had a feeling," he whispered. "She was always like that." "Dad," John said, tears streaming down his face. "Please, you have to do something. Otherwise, she'll lose everything human. And my life." Paul looked at him with a gaze so clear it gave me goosebumps. "Not as long as I'm still breathing." Teresa came in, as if she had sensed that the moment had come. "Paul," she said gently, "I've contacted the notary. He's on his way." And sure enough, an hour later, Mr. Miller, the old family notary, was standing in the room, a serious man with a gray beard and a leather briefcase. "Mr. Weber," he said calmly, "do you wish to make a change to your will?" Paul nodded weakly. "Yes, immediately." In a trembling voice he dictated, "My entire estate goes to my son, John Weber. Should he die before me, his share will not go to Marianne Weber, but to his wife, Lisa Weber. Marianne will receive only the statutory compulsory portion, which cannot be denied by law. Everything else I withdraw from her." His hand was thin, but he signed his name, guided by Mr. Miller. I held my breath. It had happened. Marianne came home a few hours later. When she entered the room and saw the notary, she froze. "What is this?" she asked shrilly. "A change to the will," Mr. Miller replied factually. Her gaze fell on Paul. "You can't do this!" She rushed to the bed, but John stepped between them. "Mom, stop!" Paul weakly raised his hand. "It's done. You took too much, Marianne. You destroyed too much. I don't want your shadow to fall over my son, too." For a moment, she was speechless. Then she screamed, a sharp, desperate sound. "You betrayed me! All of you!" She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Paul smiled tiredly, his hand in John's. "My boy," he whispered, "now you are free." 2 days later, he died, peacefully. John and I stood side by side at the grave. Marianne did not appear. The will was read, and everything she had planned crumbled to dust. She only got the statutory compulsory portion, nothing more. No house, no fortune, no power. John squeezed my hand. His gaze was heavy but clear. "She lost Lisa, but I lost my mom anyway." I rested my head on his shoulder. Maybe she was already lost a long time ago. We stood there in the cold and knew it was over. The poison had been driven out of our lives. 4 months had passed since Paul had died. 4 months since we had last seen Marianne. She had disappeared after the reading of the will, had given up the house in Gresham, and no one knew exactly where she was living now. Maybe with a distant cousin, maybe somewhere in Ohio. Sometimes I wondered if she would ever show up again. But with each passing day, the memory of her grew fainter, like a shadow slowly swallowed by the sun. John and I had been through a difficult time, weeks full of silence, questions, and tears. He was grieving for his father, but also for the image of his mother that had been definitively shattered. It was as if he had lost 2 people, and both in different ways. But gradually, something began to change. We took walks by the Willamette River, holding hands, without many words. Sometimes we sat in our living room, listening to music, and he would rest his head on my shoulder. Slowly, very slowly, he was finding his way back to life. One evening, we were standing on the balcony, the sun setting behind the rooftops. John looked at the sky and said softly, "You know, Lisa, I always believed that family meant that blood connects everything. But now I know. Family is what remains when the blood is poisoned. I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. And what do we have left? He put his arm around me, pulling me close. Us, you and me. That's enough. More than enough. I smiled, feeling the coldness leave him, feeling warmth return. For the first time in a long time, our home felt like a safe place again, no longer a battlefield. Sometimes I think of Paul, of his faint smile in bed, of the strength with which he changed the will one last time. He saved us with that, more than he knew. And sometimes I also think of Marianne, not with hatred, but with a strange sadness. A woman who wanted everything, and in the end, lost everything. But then I look at John, and I know. We have survived the poison. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most important lesson of all. Sometimes you have to see the shadows to find the light again.